Welcome to the second part of this lecture series on endocrine physiology. As I mentioned a while ago, we will focus on the function of the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland in this video presentation. So this is again the list of organs or various endocrine organs in the body. And in this presentation, we'll be focusing on the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. This is a figure from Biden and Hall showing the close relationship of the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus, although it's very small, it only consists of 0.3% of the total brain structure, is very important in the function of the central nervous system. Particularly, it controls the autonomic nervous system and the endocrine system, and thus indirectly controls body homeostasis. The hypothalamus is well placed for this purpose, lying at the center of the limbic system. So in this view, this is actually a sagittal view of the brain, showing the location of the hypothalamus. So you can clearly see the location of the hypothalamus. On the other hand, the hypophysis or the pituitary gland is located below. Okay? It weighs about 0.5 grams and is small, oval in structure, and attached to the undersurface of the brain by the infundibulum or the hypophyseal stalk. Okay? If you look at this structure in situ, it is well protected by bony structure in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. Because the hormones produced by this gland, the pituitary gland, influences the activities of many other endocrine glands, the pituitary gland, also known as the hypophysis cerebri, is often referred to as the master endocrine gland. And it is because of this, it is vital to life. Okay? So the pituitary gland is divided into two parts. You have there the anterior pituitary here, and then the posterior pituitary gland on the other side. So the anterior pituitary is also known as your adenohypophysis, while your posterior pituitary is called your neurohypophysis. Okay? So you have to take note of this because embryologically they come from different origins. Okay, so the anterior pituitary, or also known as your adenohypophysis, is divided into two parts. Your pars anterior or your pars distalis and the pars intermedia. Okay, which is separated by a cleft there. Okay. So those comprises the anterior pituitary. On the other hand, your posterior pituitary or the neurohypophysis is embryologically derived from the nervous system. That's why it's called neurohypophysis. So it's actually the one which is located or closely related to the nervous system. Okay. So the posterior pituitary is not actually a gland by itself. It consists of mostly of axons, okay, terminal axons coming from the particular neurons in the hypothalamus. Okay. On the other hand, your anterior pituitary is the one which is a gland by itself. Okay. This figure shows the relationship of the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. As you can see there, the hypophyseal artery is where the secretions coming from the hypothalamus are deposited or released. So once the hypothalamic hormones are secreted and into the bloodstream, particularly into the hypophyseal artery, they reach the anterior pituitary gland by a plexus. Okay, your primary capillary plexus, they go through the hypothalamic hypophyseal portal vessels until they reach the parenchyma of the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, so as you can see later also, the anterior pituitary gland consists of a lot of cells, 5 types of cells which secretes substances, and they secrete these substances into the veins, okay? And the hypophyseal veins will now reach the other parts of the body and into the circulation, okay? Before we talk about the hormones produced by the anterior pituitary gland, let's talk first about the hormones released by the hypothalamus. So particularly coming from the parvocellular neurons in the hypothalamus. So they release these hormones directly into the bloodstream and goes through the hypophyseal stalk. Okay. So these are your thyrotropin releasing hormone, your gonadotropin releasing hormone, your corticotropin releasing hormone, your growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, and your prolactin inhibiting hormone. So these are the hypothalamic factors, okay, that control the particular cells in the pituitary gland, the anterior pituitary gland. So for example, PRH, it stimulates secretion of your thyroid stimulating hormone coming from the thyrotropes, while your gonadotropin releasing hormone stimulates the gonadotropes to secrete follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. The corticotropin releasing hormone stimulates the corticotropes to secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. While of course, the growth hormone releasing hormone stimulates the somatotropes to secrete growth hormone. And contrary to that, you have your GHIH, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, which inhibits secretion of growth hormone by the somatotropes. And lastly, the prolactin inhibiting hormone inhibits the synthesis and secretion of prolactin by lactotropes. Keep in mind that the lactotropes are tonically inhibited by the PIH. Okay, so that is the norm. So if you remove dopamine or the prolactin inhibiting hormone, then prolactin is being released by the lactotropes. And now this slide talks about the hormones coming from the anterior pituitary gland, okay, and their functions. Okay, so you have first the growth hormone, which is secreted by the somatotropes, okay, your TSH or your thyroid stimulating hormone by the thyrotropes, the ACTH or adrenocorticotropic hormone from the corticotropes, and then prolactin from the lactotropes, and of course FSH and LH coming from the gonadotropes. Okay, so all of these hormones have respective function. Okay, so the growth hormone stimulates protein synthesis and overall growth of most cells and tissues. So I leave it to you to study the exact mechanisms of your growth hormone. The Guide on Hall excellently describes it or discusses these hormones. DSH, I will be talking about this in the third presentation when we talk about the thyroid hormone. They actually stimulate synthesis and secretion of thyroid hormones. Okay? In fact, TSH can also cause hypertrophy of the thyroid gland, not only in the secretion of the thyroid hormones, but also can cause enlargement of the thyroid gland. Your ACTH stimulates synthesis and secretion of hormones from the adrenal cortex, in the particular layers of the zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis, okay, but not in the adrenal medulla. Okay, prolactin promotes development of the female breast and secretion of milk in females, but of course, its role in the male is not yet fully elucidated. Your follicle stimulating hormone and your LH have been discussed in the previous bimonthly, and they promote growth of the follicle of the ovaries, sperm maturation in Sertoli cells or testes, stimulates testosterone synthesis in Leydig cells, stimulates ovulation and the formation of the corpus luteum, and secretion of estrogen and progesterone, respectively. So I hope you're able to recall the role of FSH and LH. This slide shows a more graphic representation of the things that I mentioned a while ago. The hormones involved, produced and released from the anterior pituitary gland. So you have there thyrotropin or TSH, okay, growth hormone, corticotropin or ACTH, and you have FSH, LH, and of course prolactin. So again, please study how the mechanisms involved in the secretion of the growth hormone, the effects of growth hormone in the other tissues, and the regulatory mechanisms behind these. And lastly, we have here the posterior pituitary. Okay, so as you can see here, the posterior pituitary contains axons. Okay, these are just axons, no? The terminal ends of the axons, which arises from the paraventricular nucleus and the supraoptic nucleus of the hypothalamus. So you have in the hypothalamus specific regions or nuclei which synthesize the hormones, no? Particularly ADH or antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin and oxytocin. So these two hormones are synthesized in the hypothalamic nucleus and then would travel down to the axons, okay, until they reach and are stored in the vesicles found in the terminal ends of the axons, which are found now in the posterior pituitary. And then they can be readily released depending on the stimulating factors. Okay, so unlike the hormones coming from the anterior pituitary gland, which are secreted and produced and released from the adenohypophysis, in this case, the posterior pituitary hormones are just released from the posterior gland. Okay, they are synthesized, produced from the hypothalamus. So I will also leave it to you to study the effects of vasopressin and oxytocin. I think you are familiar with this. Its role. We'll talk about this in our Q&A session on Thursday morning, and their regulatory mechanism for their secretion. Okay, so very easy to understand, very clear cut. Okay, so I'll just expect you to answer my questions on Thursday's Q&A session. So these are my references, particularly for this presentation. It will be chapter 76 of Guyton and Hall, textbook of medical physiology. See you in the next presentation.